expectations to a smart city than maybe I would have in my age. When you look into different cultural backgrounds, there might be a different view on smart cities in the north of Europe compared to the south, or between Asia and America and Europe. So there are a lot of elements, and what is needed now is an attempt to integrate that more and more. Commission is trying to do that with, well, one, let's say, more prominent instrument. Among other issues, we are preparing for that, which is the European Innovation Partnership on Smart Cities, which is now in its 4th year, and where we are trying to do in different major projects to follow exactly that line, to do that integration work there. That's what we are doing at present. It's quite successful, and I expect that we have to continue on that line.
So your definition for what a smart city would be doesn't then essentially revolve around technology, but around the way that policy-making, planning, and implementation essentially are coordinated.
Indeed, I think, not to anticipate the rest of the discussion, but I think what is important is not so much, and I want to be a bit proactive on that, it's not the city itself, but it's the citizens living in the city. So we do that for the citizens, and they should be in the focus of our thinking.
Thank you very much. And in fact, you found the right place to make that statement, I guess, because as we heard yesterday, Glasgow's model is people are Glasgow.
Yes.
So many thanks to you, Wolfgang Hoofs. Let me ask for Madame Trautmann's view on
So it's an organization which is very different of what we know today, and there is a question of governance. Being a smart city is the link between the policymakers, the private sector, the representatives of citizens or citizens themselves to combine and to organize the city as a collaborative project. So this is a different way than before, in a period in which we could have a sort of urban planning as we did in Strasbourg, you know, in the 80s, in 90, especially when I became mayor, I decided to build a tramway and to organize differently the transport system. It was at this time to organize it with the different modes, to find a real liberty for the citizen to use as pedestrian, cyclist, car driver, or using the tramway, the capacity to change of mode. Today, being a smart city is also to combine long distance in mobility, long distance traffic with, congestion, with many trucks. And being a cross-border is also a problem, a source of problem and capacity. On smart grids, we had a cooperative project with our German friends about recharge, installation, infrastructure for electric cars. But this was, a successful experimentation. But if you consider that in Germany, for example, when they decided to have a special tax on trucks, all the trucks came on our side, crossing the city. So now it's a real problem because the profit we had from this ambitious local policy for public transport was just, counterbalanced by the problem of the traffic. So there is also an economical side of this question of smart city. And I work a lot on this aspect because losing time for companies in transport is really a problem. There is a problem of cost. There is a problem for the people working in these companies because of the stress, but there is also more danger on the road, and there is also air pollution. So diminishing all these problems is a necessity, and we have now to combine in smart cities long-distance traffic and urban traffic. This is the challenge.
So I'm hearing essentially both of you saying we need systemic approaches, we need integrated approaches, not only cross-sectoral, but also city embedded in the larger region. Let's go now to our two private sector and provider representatives and hear how they see it. Martin Howell,
Sure.
what is a truly smart city and what do we need to do now to get there?
I wonder if anybody in the room could define what a smart city is. Or if we could find two people who would define it in the same way as each other. I bet we can't. Because it's everything to everybody. And that is the root of the problem. We have got an enormous range of issues here which we are conflating together, and that is creating a drag. It's making this difficult to do. I think progress towards the digital city in Europe is, in some cases, inspiringly fast, and things are really happening, and in other cases, bafflingly slow. And it's interesting as to why that's happening, because if you go out to the exhibition here, you will see all sorts of technological innovations which are all doable now. And in some cases, they've been doable for years. And yet, we still aren't making the progress that you would expect that we would be able to make. And let's take an example where something is really happening and it's quite inspiring, and that's Helsinki. And the reason that's happening is because of a clear vision, and because of firm leadership, and because of an attitude of all the players to want to get on and do this for the benefit of the city, and to be the first, the pioneers to achieve this. And I think if there's one thing I would say, it's we should talk less and lead more.
Okay. Tobias.
Hi. I think we're at an important threshold where previously sort of smart cities were talked about and transport was talked about in isolation, and we're in a place now where integrating and collaborating is really important. Users are now determining the agenda, not wishing to sway any votes on the second question. But at Transport Systems Catapult, we've done a survey on traveller needs to understand what it is that people want. Given that increasing urbanisation is happening, technology is in place to deliver, as Martin and others have just described. But what it is users now determining the agenda and demanding transport and travel and mobility in a different way. We call that intelligent mobility, and it's a way of connecting the smart city agenda with the transport systems agenda, and as part of infrastructure as well. So I think there's a whole range of needs, but people have to understand why. Providers now have to understand why travellers are demanding mobility in the way that they want it. Obviously, we talk about mobility as a service. So in terms of integration, that's the key thing to happen to deliver a truly smart city.
Very interesting. And while you were saying that, I was casting a glance here at the results on our first question. And first thing is congratulations. Lots of you have voted. That's great. And what we see here, interestingly enough, huge majority says it will be a slow and steady evolution. It's not necessarily going to occur through one particular breakthrough. Wolfgang Höfs, would you agree with that? And if so, what are the things that most need to evolve? Where would you say these are barriers that really need to be broken down over time?
Well, from a personal point of view, I agree to that poll. I would have voted in a similar way. Because I don't see the disruptive element. Also, there are some indicators, in particular when it comes to mobility, and we might want to discuss that here on the panel. There are, of course, disruptive elements not to be neglected if you look into the...
Such as?
Such as, I was just coming to examples like what Google is doing, what companies like Uber are doing. They have a completely different approach to mobility. They have a completely different corporate background. And they do business in a different way. So this really might disrupt the situation. And that's a challenge for Europe because we are strong on let's say the classical approach, the evolutionary approach. So disruption will have an influence on the rollout and the deployment of smart city solutions. Also, I think we are well prepared to follow that. And the good news for me is the fact that these let's say, disruptive elements challenge us and challenge our industry, challenge our people, challenge our politicians to go faster forward. And that's good news.
May I just ask you about potential negative disruptors, because it's something you and I briefly talked about yesterday, namely cybercrime and security issues.
Sure.
Do you see that as something that could actually hold back this kind of evolution?
Indeed. In particular, the question of cybersecurity is a very important one in all these contexts, not only for the mobility sector, but also for energy and other things. And let's keep in mind the currency of this century, which is no longer money, but it's data. And when it comes to personalized data, when it comes to data about what we are doing, where we are doing things, that's a wealth of information to be harvested and to be used, if it is done in a proper way, or even misused when it comes to crime and to societal risks. So that's another topic which maybe we can discuss a little bit on the panel here. What about the big data issue? What about data analytic issues? And what about security of communication, of data processing, of data storage?
Let's indeed come back to that shortly. Let me first just get everybody's take on what we see here on this vote. Katrin Trautmann, I mentioned earlier the ECO 2030 strategy, which does envisage Strasbourg as a fully connected smart city by 2030. Do you think it's going to need a breakthrough to get there, or do you see this as a process of slow and steady evolution?
We organize it as an evolution, but we are conscious that there are also types of revolution, especially automatic car, because this will change a lot the situation in cities. And if we imagine the future of cities, I think that, for example, I spoke with urban planners, and I made them imagining that, thinking that in the future, what we have now as motorways with pollution will be connected roads, clean roads with clean vehicles, and this will be green corridors for nature and for, the usage of cyclists or other pedestrian people, So the cities will change in their aspects and organization. So this will be a revolution to change the links between quarters, people, and the organization of commerce, for example, through new internet services, but also as a port city. My experience is to work on a project to have a smart access to the port for trucks. So this is possible now. This was not before. So this is a rupture, situation with new possibilities, but it must be organized as a transition. Why? Because people must be informed. This must be a common challenge, and we need to see what are the startups, what the private sector can do, what is the answer of researchers. That's why we have so many people around with their expertise and the discussion between them.
Thanks very much. Martin Howell and Toby House, disruptors or evolution? What do you think?
Bit of both. There will be a steady evolution because we have to work with legacy systems. We have to work with cities as they are. We can't start from scratch. And the people who are going to be investing in this, whether it's city authorities or private industry and commerce, have got finite budgets to do this. And so there's not limitless resources to make massive transformation. It has to be incremental, and it has to be based on a business case that provides a payback in a reasonable time, otherwise investors aren't interested. Having said that, there will be breakthroughs, and I'll give you a good example, and that's the huge success that we've seen in London with contactless payment cards, and the ability to use your contactless bank card as your ticket on the entire London transport network. That has taken contactless payments for Visa in the space of 18 months from 1 in 24 to 1 in 7. And that is what's driving a revolution. And it's happening because it is kind of serendipitous with the way people's attitudes are changing. If you can introduce something that chimes with the way they see their lives changing elsewhere, they will grab it and they will run with it. And that's what's happened in London.
I see lots of nodding from the policymakers on the panel, so clearly those systems appeal. Yes. Toby Haas, what do you think? Disruptors as opposed to evolution? Again, what we just heard, clearly many European cities are not going to be doing a lot of expansion. They have to work with the infrastructure that they have. Will it take breakthroughs to get the kind of smart city and the kind of maximum use of that infrastructure, or are we going to see that evolutionary trend?
I think, like the other panelists have said, it's going to be a bit of both. There's going to be some technology that will deliver now. There's some technology we know that's in the pipeline, probably quite a lot of it out there that you can see will deliver very shortly. And there's others that we haven't got a clue that are going to come. They're in someone's head somewhere, a little thought, and it'll deliver sometime soon. But there's also some disruptors. Obviously, we've seen the likes of Uber, and I saw a frightening stat or a graph. I think the numbers weren't even on there. It was that frightening. With Uber utilisation in the rest of the world cities was a sort of a steady upward curve. But in China, it went absolutely vertical, and that was only in the first few months of operation. So there's obviously a demand there for something new and a disruptor. There'll be many more, Ubers out there, and for that particular example is probably why Apple invested in Didi, etc., because they can see that something's happening and they want to be part of it, but maybe a traditional business model that a company may have or an authority may utilise may not be right and set for the future. So they either have to buy in the technology, adapt a little bit, or even model and visualise what that may look like. And I think at the, for us at the Transport Systems Catapult, we spend a lot of time modelling and visualising what those potential futures look like. And so there's a way of sort of testing, try before you buy on the stuff that we know, and also predicting and projecting a little bit further into the future just to see if we can cope with, what may come.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned Uber, also car sharing services, clearly part of all of this. Leaving aside decarbonization aspects, assuming the vehicles used would be clean vehicles, don't we still have to worry about congestion problems in very dense European cities? Auto-based models, we talked about it briefly yesterday, but I would be interested also in the opinion of some of you here on the panel. Are they really an answer?
I think in so we say the jury's out on whether it will free up some space or actually, free up some capacity in the network. I think if you're using, full autonomous vehicle, either highways, modes, areas, sectors, the numbers are 30 or 40% capacity could be freed up just like that. The time where we're talking about the evolution, where we're blending in and we're just trying to understand how, fully autonomous and partly autonomous and, non-autonomous vehicles are working together, is where you're going to start to see some of the challenges, and it may only make a tiny difference to congestion. It may make it worse in the short term, but that's because the current business models and current infrastructure provision isn't set up to deliver on that business model, because that's not how things have been developed. So I think where you're somewhere like the example I gave in China, where you can build a brand new city, fantastic. You can build it with full intelligent mobility, full autonomous mode, and it's going to deliver on that promise. Where you're trying to retrofit into existing cities, as we are in Europe, especially in places like Strasbourg or even London, where it's a truly mega city, it's a lot more difficult. It's doable, but it's just a lot more difficult. I think policy and regulation is slightly lagging behind technology, slightly lagging behind user demand, and so once those all start to get to running at the same speed, then we start to make some big inroads.
Madame Trautmann, because you were nodding when the first kind of disruptor was mentioned, namely payment services, I'd be curious in your opinion about your opinion on that, but perhaps also on the role that you see autonomous vehicles playing in a fully connected smart city. And I'm thinking perhaps in particular about the benefits that such vehicles could use for cities facing demographic challenges And certainly Strasbourg, like many, is seeing an older population, more and more people who, in order to be socially included, which is a high priority for Strasbourg, are going to need forms of door-to-door transport. So perhaps a brief word for you on both of those points.
So we worked on a project which was supported by the European Commission. The name is Crystal. It's an automated vehicle, and we tested it in public space. It was very nice, very good, but the day we wanted to use it in the public space, we saw that there was no definition of this type of vehicle in the law and in the reglementation, so we were not allowed to use it in outdoor space. So my conclusion on that is we need to look on all the aspects in the same moment. And accompanying the rolling out, the deployment of new technologies with, two aspects, intellectual property, and also all the reglementation and law aspects. So this is very important. This experience was motivated by the fact that we were the first to use the sharing vehicles as a system of mobility as service in the city. It is still the case. We are just after Paris, but with a special company, which is a cooperative company, because it was an initiative from people, from citizens of the city, they wanted to build an association. So you have Uber, but you have also, bottom-up initiative. So we continue with that because it's very successful. And you have the experience of BlaBlaCar, which is sharing. Why I speak about that? Because the independent autonomous vehicle will diminish in cities, and we have to organize the places in which people can use these vehicles, because the density of cities give problems for a big number of vehicles, even if they are clean. So we need also to find new ways to organize the access to clean vehicles and common vehicles. So this experience is about, it's not now in the public really, in the phases of deployment, this experience of automatic autonomous car, but this is a combination. It is a little car. You can also mix with modularity several types of vehicles and combining like a little tramway to use it for passengers, for freight, little freight, because one of the problems in cities is little freight, urban freight. So it's a new system. So it's, we were a bit too early with this project. Then the capacity to use it for policymakers, administrations, and also users. So it's also, when we see the future, as you said, Toby, we need to combine the rapture effect and the construction of the strategy. That's why it is so strategic to build smart city. For me, smart city is a result. It is when people think smart. In the house with smart grids, in the car, in the transportation, in the job, in the company, So it's smart is something which is complicated in definition. It must be a reality.
And just one word on payment systems, because you were nodding emphatically when Martin Howell mentioned those.
Yes, we had a pilot project some years ago in the 90s with the payment card. It was not a big success, I might say, but
we didn't do that one.
A disclaimer there.
But now we have, the payment without contact through card, payment card or through mobile, and we have some applications on mobile for that, for parking, for public transport, electronic ticketing, and now we have a card for all the modes, trains, tram, buses, and sharing cars.
Thank you very much. Let's perhaps, because of your emphasis on the need for coordinated policy approaches and regulatory approaches, let us take a look at the answer to our second question. Dear technicians, could we get our second question results up here on the slide?
At this time it worked.
go.
We tried it, you know, it was really...
So this is the one about the main drivers of the change to smart cities, transition to smart cities.
That's an interesting
And
one.
42% think it's going to be the users. 28% say, is that right, 28? Yeah, policymakers and regulators. 26, the private sector. And wow, only 4% thinks, so either you think the technology is there and in place, or you think the scientists and researchers are not pushing very hard. I assume it's the former. Okay, users. Let's find out whether the panel would agree with you. Wolfgang Höfs, as a policymaker and regulator, do you feel like you're off the hook? We just heard Katrin Trautmann say, actually, we've got some issues in terms of having clear liability standards in place. We need clear policy frameworks, but apparently the audience thinks that, in fact, it's the users who are going to drive it.
Well, my interpretation is slightly different from yours. Sorry for that.
Go ahead, please.
I think that's quite an interesting picture, because that really argues for what we said before, that all the stakeholders to be involved, almost on equal level, with a little advantage or a little bigger part for the users, which really are the decisive figure for the success of a smart city, because it's all about the users. I said that in the beginning. So having the role of the users in front is fine for me, and the other part seems to be, except the researchers, rather balanced, which really substantiated the argument that a common approach is needed among policymakers on one hand side, technology providers not to be neglected, the private sector who has an interest in business cases, and the users. And this applies in particular, coming back to what has been said before, for the period of migration into a more, in a smarter city, smarter mobility, whatever. Discussing that issue about connected and automated driving, I think it's quite obvious from a technical point of view that in the beginning, with a given legal framework we have, we will have more congestions at the beginning, because what is happening at present is that people are driving very close to each other on a congested motorway, which raises a little bit the capacity. Also, it's illegal, I understand. So by this kind of behavior, we are working with a limited capacity. When it comes to automation, we will have the right distance from the very beginning. At that point in time, you have to rethink, and whether the distance which is required today, the safety distance which is required today, is still applicable in future. And once we have overcome that, then of course there will be a positive effect on capacities. And I think this is well reflected in these answers as well. There are some legal means, legislative means and regulatory means necessary to cope with that new situation. The big challenge is really the migration into that situation.
The transition.
The transition, sorry, I'm using the wrong word. English is not my native language, sorry for that. Migration is something different. It's transition, you're right. And the users play an important role in that.
And from the work that you've done at DG Connect, what would you say that the users are going to be looking for first in terms of smart urban mobility, leaving aside questions of now motorways, but really focusing on the city core? What do you think are the first gains, the first benefits that they're going to be looking for?
Well, they're looking to have fulfilled their own mobility demand, which might differ from one to another person, whether you go to an office or whether you to work, or whether you are on leisure and want to go somewhere to the forest just on the outskirts of the city. So this generates different mobility demands, and what we need, I think, is a good mixture of the different transport means and different transport modes for different purposes. So a kind of variety on one hand side. We have that variety today as well, but what is missing, from my understanding, is a combination of these variable opportunities we have to have them integrated into one way to access this information, and then we are back to data and information to have the information. If I want to go somewhere outside of Glasgow to a nice distillery for a visit this afternoon or this evening, how to go there? I don't know. I'm a foreigner here, so having one way to access that would be nice. That applies to the citizens themselves as well, I think.
Martin Hill, so more choice for users, clearly one of the things they're going to be looking for. Are users also going to have to make changes in their own behavioral patterns in order to make a smart city happen? And if so, how can we persuade them to do so, and what kind of changes are we going to need to see?
Okay. Can I just comment on
Please,
this as well?
absolutely.
Which I think that's almost in the right order, in that the users are increasingly telling the world what they want. They see, they behave in a way for most retailing that involves smartphones. They do all their buying online of their groceries, of their clothes, and their energy, and they want to have that same capacity, that same capability for all their purchasing, and that includes travel and transport and mobility. So they are creating the need. The private sector is responding to that with the means to do it, and then I think we have a role for the policymakers. They have to enable a situation where those can respond in a way that enables people to make the most of the technological capabilities that are there for the benefit of the city or the region or the state. And that is where the policymakers can come in. And I hope we're going to go back to the question of cybersecurity, because there's a lot we can say about that. I'm sure we will.
We are indeed.
And then you've got the scientists who can give you their opinions, and people can choose to listen to them or not. And I think that's why we're at 4%. What do we need to do to get people to change? How do we know what people want? Well, the first thing to do is ask them. And we do that, for example, in the UK. We're working on a project with City University and the Knowledge Transfer Partnership, where we're actually asking thousands of users what they want to see in the future of mobility, and I'm sure we're not the only ones doing that. I don't think, as the technological wheel starts to turn and as the momentum picks up, I think there's going to be less and less need to persuade people to do these things, because you've got a generation growing up now. We've had the conversation about autonomous vehicles and about mobility as a service. I'm firm believers in that, because my children are not children, they're 26 and 28 now. They have no aspiration to car ownership at all. Completely different to the way things were when I grew up. They don't want, they are interested in the journey. They're not interested in the mode. They're not interested in being passengers or bus riders. They're interested in, how do I get to where I need to go cheaply, effectively, efficiently, and quickly. And if you can provide them with that, you're on a winner and people will grab it. And I think that momentum is what is going to drive it. Users will take it up if you hit them at the right time with the right solution.
Just a word, please. You say you involve users in your planning, or at least you ask. How do you do that?
Well, I can give you an example, actually. We've got a virtual ticket office we call Next Agent, which has been installed in Essen in Germany and on a trial basis, and we have one at Stansted Airport. Any of you who've travelled through Stansted may have seen this. It's like a ticket office, but the ticket clerk sits behind a window. They are actually 50 miles away, and it's a high-definition screen. You can touch the screen and you are put through straight away to somebody who speaks your language. So we've got 10 different languages spoken instantly. It gives a huge range of service, exactly the same as you would have in a normal ticket office. And we went and asked all those people using that, what do you think of this? 94% of them said, love it, better than a real ticket office. So the way you involve people is, as I said, by asking them, and the answers will speak for themselves. You know, if people are using these things, the evidence will be quite plain. And there's all sorts of ways in which you can gather that. But if you don't ask users, if you don't involve users, then you're probably going to get what you're asking for, which is a solution that misses the point.
Many thanks. Toby House, your thoughts on what we see there?
Glad, from a personal perspective, glad to see users there, because I think that's where we're moving towards, users demanding that. I wonder if we'd have polled this, say, even 6 months or a year ago, whether policymakers and regulators would have got so high. I think, given the driver, if you excuse the pun, of connected autonomous vehicles, I think has allowed policymakers and regulators to be more fleet of foot, more reactive and proactive in being swifter to enable. And I think in the UK we've got one of the most open and relaxed regulatory environments for connected autonomous vehicles. You just need your car and some insurance, and you can go and drive on the roads. I think now, as I've said in Strasbourg, that was difficult in the first instance. You realise you couldn't do it, whereas now policymakers are saying, okay, how can we work with you to make that happen? And I think, to my honest point about social media and smartphone penetration, I think we have a tool which is we call sentiment mapping, which is it takes real-time tweets from lots of different transport modes, puts them on a map so you can actually see there and then straight away what people are thinking and what about the service and how it's working. An example, I think, on a Virgin train, one gentleman was, shall we say, caught without any toilet paper in the train, and he pinged Virgin Media on Twitter, and immediately a guard picked it up after being told by the central, boom, down there, excuse me, sir, here you go, thank you very much. You wouldn't have seen that sort of, 6 months, sort of a year ago. And I think also with the sort of, the driverless car stuff, I mean, Martin talked about, asking users. I mean, as I mentioned before, we did a traveller needs survey, which is the largest survey of 10,000 people online, 100 in-depth interviews, etc., which turned around and said 39% of people would get in a driverless car today. And it's like, they're not actually been proven to, be fully operational in urban environments yet for safety, regulation, security, reasons. The technology's there to be able to do it, but we need to, to put that mix together. And I think that, together with the fact that people are operating differently, and Martin mentioned again, asset owners, desire for your children to own cars. Again, in our survey, there's lots of people, we call them urban metropolites. They're the ones that will sit there and say, I don't care, I don't need a vehicle, I don't need an asset, so I don't potentially have more congestion because I don't own my vehicle that's either sitting outside my house for 5% of the time or I'm using it in a congested environment. I want to get from A to B, and if, potentially a mobility, potentially a mobility provider saying the best way for you to get from A to B is to take a car, a bus, a train, and a tram, rather than you trying to work it out on, in a car, because that's the most efficient way for myself and the system to operate. That is where we need to be, where it's a, sort of a whole system aggregation that says, I understand all of us want to get from A to B, but we want to get in different ways. Do you want to get there in comfort? I want to get there fastest. Do you want to get there cheapest, etc.? And it's able to, it's able to cope with that and give you the openness. Opening data, turning that data into information, to real-time information, to usable information, and personalised user information is when you're going to get a truly smart city.
Let's stay with that particular aspect and in general talk about who needs to be responsible for what piece. Open platforms, Wolfgang, is clearly a very, very crucial part of linking physical infrastructure to the ICT side. Who's going to drive that particular part forward? Who has to be bearing the lead responsibility for ushering in the kind of open platforms that clearly will be essential to link up different players?
Just before coming back to your question, let me link to what Toby said before, because I think that's very interesting. He was talking about information and access to information, and you were quoting Twitter and others, which are instruments we are used to use to pull information and to understand and make our decisions, our mobility decisions. The challenge, from my understanding, is to have that to a broad audience. So my mother-in-law, who is 88, she will not use Twitter, so you need other means for other people. And keeping that societal aspect in mind, and also kids is different, at least the small ones, is very important. On the provision of these information and the linking of digital infrastructure with physical infrastructure, which is, from my understanding, not only a question of infrastructure in the sense of having tram lines, bus lines, whatsoever, when it comes to physical infrastructure, or when it comes to digital infrastructure, to broadband or high-speed mobile networks. It's more than that. It's about the sensors there. It's about engineers would say objects on the infrastructure, the vehicles, the trams, and so on. They need to be equipped as well with these digital instruments to provide these information to the people. Responsibility, you asked for responsibility. That's a question not easy to answer for me, to be honest. Of course, we are taking initiatives, for example, in the EIP on smart cities, We do have an action on the Memorandum of Understanding to provide these platforms. Of course, in the end, it's not the Commission who can develop that or any other public body, from my understanding, but there need to be private initiative, either by service providers, private companies, but there could be also a model like the one you mentioned for mobility issues in Strasbourg, regarding cooperative approaches among citizens, for example, doing that. So that's an open question for me, not easy to answer, and there might be not one silver bullet for that, but different solutions.
How do you see the responsibility, for example, of municipal policymakers, also regional policymakers, in creating the kind of policy frameworks that will allow for the linking of physical and digital infrastructure, but also, so to speak, a fruitful environment for smart city development? How do you see your particular role, Kathleen Trautmann?
If I see the attitude of many smart cities and cities which cooperate between them and through their experience, special experience, we feel that being local elected people, we have a special responsibility to organize the services. Martin said, if you can give the answers for the consumers to use, for the travelers to use the different type of modes, and they want to go it is the journey which interests them. Of course, you are true. This is the reality, but we need to have the offer. And the problem will be, with this new attitude, is to find the money and the economical balance for example, public transport, which has a cost. If you are tremendously successful, as we are with the tramway, going now to the other side of the Rhine, to Kiel, it's a problem to be successful, because we have too many people in it. 300,000 people per day, it's enormous. It's much more than we could imagine. We just had such a movement, and not the movement we hoped for. So this is a problem. What can we do? This is a public answer. For data, data is a crucial question, and infrastructure, digital infrastructure. When we decided to build the tramway, we put fiber in all the works. So we could add the physical infrastructure for mobility and for digital needs. So then we can transfer big amount of data, because in mobility you need a lot of them. We had a sort of an action for open data, public data. It was a good experience because many startups used them, but we couldn't have rupture, discovery, or answer. So what we consider now is that we need to speak together to know how we will do it, and how, with which responsibility for each partner. So the partnership, the multi-stakeholder system, must be discussed and organized so that the data can be used in a good way. If I comment on this, result, I think that the work of researchers and startups is not so visible as for the private sector. But we have now a situation in which there is a link between, creativity in digital developments of new mobility. There is also a strong link between researchers, experts, and private sector. If I see that, for example, in the cluster, Vehicle of the Future, we work with. So there is a sort of short link between the partners. And this is a solution, I think, because you can see very frequently where are the questions, the problems, and you anticipate. The problem is to anticipate, because after that, if you don't anticipate, the people are very negative with the capacity you give. Can we consider, when we have such a person, expert person, as we have in a center of consumer rights, we experiment in the cross-border situation, have we conflicts through consumers of new mobility systems. Not so much. Not so much. So I think that mobility is a driver, is a front runner for the smart city. I'm sure that this is a common usage which can give to the population a new capacity. But we were obliged to change our minds because we thought with Hugo, our application and electronic ticketing, we will not need some shops to buy tickets. Contrary. Because the people think mobility is our task, our affair. They want to discuss it. So they come now to in a big shop of the public company, and it's a place in which they can give their advice, discuss together, use new services, experiment these systems. So this is a new way to give also a public opportunity to people to use it, and so people who are not, as young people, who don't have the same competence, they can learn it. So we have several public spaces in which people can learn also.
So also, clearly in that transitional period, a need for parallel services and also for educating end users. Let's talk about two different perhaps aspects to this interrelation between the different stakeholders. Clearly, data is also money. Monetization, big issue. Who gets to monetize it? The different stakeholders need to work together, but they are also rivals on this issue, competitors, so to speak, in terms of who gets those economic benefits. That's one side, and the other side, of course, is the security and cybercrime side. So perhaps both you, Martin Howell, and Toby Hiles on that point.
Okay. It's going to vary from case to case as to how the economic element of this, how the economic case stacks up. If I can take it to the next level up and then come back down, the reason that so many arguments and debates happen about data privacy is because data has been so roundly abused commercially for the last 20, 30 years, or probably much longer than that, but the internet has made it, created another world of data abuse. And if we are to use the data that is generated by the way people move and the way people live in their cities for their good, we have somehow got to earn their trust back. And they have to know that the data about their movements is going to be used for their good. Now, having had a meeting with Toby's team up at Transport Systems Catapult, I heard something there that I thought was fascinating, and that's right now, over 50% of people are willing to give up data about their personal behavior if they think they're going to get something back of value. And I think if we need to exploit that and need to earn back the trust, as Transport for London does. They give anonymized data on people's movements to app developers, so they don't have to develop the apps themselves, because they're a transport provider, they're not an app developer. And that makes perfect sense to me. And they are trusted. They're a trusted organization by virtually everybody who uses their networks every day. The data that they are generating is going to be anonymized, or if it's not anonymized, that if it's a personalized card or a bank card, it's not going to be sold and abused. So that's the first aspect. The question about data privacy and security, I think, is best illustrated by an example going back about a year, maybe more than that. There was a debate about what are they going to do in New York to replace the Metro card. And if you've traveled in New York, they still use a magnetic stripe card, quite an old-fashioned system. They know they've got to replace it. Question on a website was, should we replace it with something like Oyster from London? Very successful. Let's do that. There was a debate instantly on this subject. And one of the first comments was from someone called Louis, who said, great, another way for the government to track me. And then there was a pause, and up comes Felipe. And Felipe says, Louis, I hate to be the person to break this to you. Nobody cares where you're going. And what's more, I've just checked out your public profile on Facebook that you put there, and I know where you live, that you're out on Saturday night with your girlfriend, and how long your house is going to be empty. And you're worried about data privacy. And I think that is the double standards that we need to sometimes somehow close the gap on, because people are willing to share information on Facebook, on social media, because they think it makes them look better and their life look more interesting. But in terms of travel, they are willing to share it if they think they're going to get something back. And a good analogy for that would be is if they give up that information, then you can then use that as a means of persuading them to do something different. And that could be incentivizing them with cheaper travel going forward. It could be iTunes vouchers. It could be Starbucks. Whatever you want, they get to choose. And I think that is the personalized aspect of this whole thing that Toby was talking about earlier. That is the key to success.
Thanks very much. Let's come back to security, because I'd like to get Toby to pick up on that point, if you would.
First of all, I'd like to thank Martin for quoting our lovely research as well. Thank you very much. Save me having to do it. I can scrub those bits off. The security, well, in the UK, we've got an immense amount of expertise in sort of cyber data security in our defence. Guys, GCHQ and all the other four-letter acronyms, CPNI, the guys who protect national infrastructure, etc., they're all very good at that, keeping data, protecting it. They don't know how to impart that knowledge to a transport and a smart city community who are saying, we kind of need to be protected, but we don't really know what it is that, we don't know the right questions to ask of you to allow you to give us that expertise. So there is that sort of trust issue that we're hearing about. There's also the expertise and knowledge transfer that you can only get from understanding that, you know, to work cross-organisationally, for a moment, leave the user out of this, but cross-organisationally to actually get a better outcome. You mentioned in your introduction that I worked on the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. This was the first time that we had multi-stakeholder operating plans being shared across organisational boundaries, because people realised that if you did that, you actually got the benefits of the whole. Example around the Olympic Park, Stratford Underground Station and Mainline Station. One side of the platform is an overground, one side of the mainline, and one side is an underground. If they had a problem, they just shoved their people off their service onto the others. They didn't have a clue whether there was capacity here or capacity in the underground station. So we had to take them through that process, and they realised that by taking a holistic and operational view, you actually got the benefits of efficiency in the system. So those sorts of things, it's like, we've done it before, let's not forget that sort of stuff. I know that was a very specific time, but let's not forget that. But trust between commercial players is absolutely imperative. I mean, there's a £900 billion a year by 2025 global market for what we call intelligent mobility, and it's only by taking long-term views and trust that you can actually engender that. So it may be that sort of, Martin's organisation may be a top player in their industry in the UK, and they've probably got a couple of other players who are trying to take their business off them. So Martin may produce a black product, and some of those may produce a white and a green product. Actually, they're really good in their own country, whereas the global artists are sitting there going, the reason you're not making global strides is because globally we want a product that does black, green and white, but you can't work together to deliver that for UK PLC because of that trust issue. So we've got to overcome some of the trust issue, and that is a big thing for cyber, because we've got car companies saying, well, actually, the data that's being generated in a vehicle is our data. I heard Ed Vasey, the government minister, say, well, actually, it's a personal. So it's my data that I'm transmitting up, whether it's through the car or through my phone network, is my data. I decide what doing that. You've got the phone companies saying, well, actually, that's travelling on our networks. That's our data. So it's until people turn around and say, actually, there's a certain level, of private data, there's a certain level of organisational data, and anonymising that, and until that trust is, engendered between all of those parties, it's going to be difficult to move forward. But policymakers and regulators, I say, 6 months ago, that would have been quite low, in my opinion. But actually, because of that trust is starting to come up in all sectors there, I think that's probably reflecting in that number.
So Toby has essentially saying, Wolfgang Hoofs, this is something that the stakeholders can work out amongst themselves. Would you say that's right, or do we need a clear regulatory policy-driven framework that says data on this segment belongs to this actor, and they are the lead actor that can monetize on that particular part of the value chain?
think I would be very happy if the stakeholders do it themselves, so no regulatory approach would be necessary there. Reporting from my daily life, in a way, is that I listen to the stakeholders saying, Commission, why are you not in a position to help us to generate this trust you were discussing about, coming to the Connected Automated Driving Initiative, where we are very active in my DG. One of the big issues there is about certificates, these electronic signatures describing that you're dealing with trusted information. So somebody that needs some regulation, some source of trust at the very beginning, which needs to be established. That's discussed among them and the Commission, and I guess in the end there will be some regulatory action being necessary, because who are the trusted institutions? That's a question, and maybe that's a public sector in the end, because there's a lot of competition. You mentioned that in your statement. So that it will be difficult to organize that on a private basis. The other issue, of course, is when we're talking about data, what kind of data are we discussing about? And what is the purpose these information are used for? Well, data are very different. Some were mentioned when it comes to vehicles, for example. There are other issues, and when it comes to automated driving, for example, there are data which are relevant for acting, for steering a car, for braking a car, which is very sensitive data in terms of road safety and other things. So other rules may apply to these kind of data compared to other data. For example, the fact that I'm sitting on the stage here at the moment, so some people might know from my mobile phone where I'm sitting. That's a different issue and a different quality of data, which makes it necessary, from my understanding, that different rules apply for these kind of data. And there's another aspect I would like to mention. That's the use of data. Use of data for private purpose, for business purpose is one issue, but there might also be a public interest. And when it comes to public interest, again, we have to see what is really the public interest, what data are needed, what data are available, and what is the access to these data. Who grants the access? Is it done from a public point of view by regulation legislation for public data, but that couldn't apply in the same way for for private data, so they need some kind of agreement, whatever that agreement might be, among private actors there. So it's a very complex question, and very closely linked to the question, how secure are these data? And security is one aspect. How secure are they transferred over networks? How secure are they processed? How secure are they stored? There are different aspects to be considered. And keep in mind that this is not in one hand. This is in different hands. Different actors are doing that. Right? The circle goes around. We come back to trust. So the parties have to trust each other to work properly and for everybody benefit in this particular ecosystem.
Katrin Trautmann, security now per se, not so much in the sense of my data, personal data, and what can be done with them, but security of the city as a whole. A truly smart city, completely interlinked, on the grid, digitally. Is that also a more vulnerable city? For example, cyber terrorism? And if so, who's responsible for that part of it? Among these different stakeholders, what are the key areas of responsibility when it comes to making sure that a truly interlinked city is not a city that can be laid flat by a cyber attack?
I think this question is very up-to-date, because in France, in which we had these terrorist attacks, it was in public transport. In Brussels, it was in restaurants, in cultural places in France, but it can be on some institutional buildings, and we know that. And it can be through cybersecurity. So yes, the city is more, unsecure with the new systems. So we have a reflection today on our scheme of protection for data center It's a discussion we have also with private partners, because we have some banks, we have also some, public institutions like, Council of Europe, European Parliament. So informatics, networks, and storage of data with total protection is an issue for us. So this is a real risk. And when I was in a previous mandate elected in the European Parliament, I presided the delegation in the Global Conference for Internet Governance, and we discussed about all these aspects, how we can do. We know that we are transparent with our mobile phones when we look through, research systems as Google and so on. And the CEO of Kaspersky said to our delegation, there is no zero risk. You have problems of security. So we said, what is the issue? It is in the question you pay, a much more important amount of money to be secure. Yeah. Is there a difference? And he said there are two worlds, if I can say. The ordinary world and the state and international security world. Mm-hmm. So this was separate. Yep. For me, as a part of a team of a city which is international one, we have all the levels of problems of security in the public space, in cybersecurity, and we know that if we are not sufficiently solid with our systems, and also with Germany, because we need to have a sort of common vision of what we are doing with data, we have some doors open for attacks. So this is an issue. We don't know for the moment who will decide finally and who will pay for it, because there is a cost for security. And when you discuss with population, there is no tax on that. There is no amount of money you can have. But this will be a real issue, and I think it's very, very near in our period of time. So hacking systems, having problems on security, it's a risk also, for example, for hospitals. We know that for hospitals, you can have, for example, I discussed with a specialist of one type of cancer, and she said, okay, using big data gave results for research in 6 months, and before, for these results, we needed 6 years. So it's a real progress, but the risk. Right. So there is an open discussion about with hospitals, with university, with public offices, with national administration, to see how we organize this.
Martin Hals, is this an area where there are technical fixes, or is this something that will have to be driven in the end also by policy and regulation?
Much the same as the question we discussed earlier. Yeah. There's a role for everybody in this. There's technical fortress you can put up around your data. Nobody can guarantee 100% absolute security. The characteristic of the hacker and the cyber terrorist is they are going to be one step ahead of you virtually all the time. And we have to accept that. So there's a role for everybody to play. It's very unlikely, I would think, you asked earlier the question about who's responsible for this. It's very unlikely that a city or a transport operator is going to be specialist enough to be able to run a data center that is the most secure it can be. You're going to hand that over to a third party, to somebody who specializes in doing that very thing. So there's a role for the private sector, and in an outsourced way, I think that's the way that would happen. There's a role for the city and the policymakers and the state in setting the standards that are expected and making sure that everybody who plays in the game meets those standards and has to meet those standards. And there's a role for users in in behaving responsibly themselves and not giving away data themselves and allowing entry into the system that way. So, just like all of these things, nothing is ever going to happen in isolation. There has to be teamwork, there has to be a partnership approach to making these things work. But can you guarantee 100% it's never going to happen? No.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on security? Because I have one other issue I'd briefly like to touch on, but if anybody wants to add anything on the security part. No. Okay. One last question, because we are at the ITS European Congress. DG Connect recently has been talking about the need to ensure a niche for European content providers when it comes to digital content. I'm wondering about in the mobility arena, Wolfgang Höfs, we've heard a lot about some of those big global players, Google as... Was that?
Is that a new one? Is it?
There's been a merger.
Freudians.
Quick, copyright that now. Copyright that name now, quick. Yeah.
Right.
We've heard about mention made of Uber, of Google, global players. How can we ensure that there is going to be a niche for European actors in this space? Does the Commission have something up its sleeve in that area?
That's a good question. If we had, I would be happy to communicate here.
This is the place to announce it.
This is a solution. Well, first of all, it's not my mandate to speak on behalf of the Commission, but I'm just working with the Commission. So, it's a question which indeed is discussed these days, and a lot of initiatives we are doing at present are leading into that direction. It's not that we would be in a position, and that's my personal opinion about that we can establish such kind of platform or whatever, which is in competition to private actors in other regions of the world. It's not that way we can go. But what we are doing is trying to support European competitiveness in this market in different actions. For example, I mentioned the platform issues we are working on and supporting in the EIP in the European Innovation Partnership on smart cities, which is one element to that one. Another initiative is, of course, the free flow of data initiative, which is active at present. We'll continue in autumn, and where we will have first results, most probably end of the year, where we're looking at all these data issues and to prepare an environment, an ecosystem where Europe can grow in these areas. This does not mean that we kick out Google and Uber out of the market. That's not the idea, but and that's not realistic from my understanding. But we are trying to do measures into that one. And when it comes to my closer work field within the Commission, for example, when it comes to connected automated driving, this is an issue where we think that Europe has still a competitive advantage vis-à-vis other regions in the world, and we try to support it at our best to keep that level or even to increase that level and have a competitive advantage for Europe, which in the end also means jobs and growth in Europe. So on that level we are trying to bring Europe forward. Also the overall theme of these Congress in Intelligent Transportation Systems, I think Europe is on a good way, has still an important role in the world, and you see we have a lot of international guests in the room as well. So it seems that we have interesting messages to promote here, and these are the little steps we are doing. It's not that we are competing with major international brands on that. That's a different issue. Sorry if I didn't reply precisely to your question, but I did my best.
Many thanks. I think we have time for just a couple of audience questions, if there are some out there. Do we have a mic, though? We have a mic up here. Who in the audience does have a question? Okay. How about if we meet halfway? I'll bring this over here. Okay. Herman is going to do the honors. Thank you very much, Herman. And would you just remind us who you are, please, in case not everybody recognizes you? Is it on? Dear sound technicians, could we activate that mic?
Now?
Yeah.
My name is Helge Molin. I'm from the Austrian Ministry of Transport. I want to thank the panel for these very interesting contributions. One point I'm missing in this discussion, going back to the users as the center of our attention is, and I'm missing in a lot of the discussions, is the demographics. We're saying the users are more and more inclined to leave the car out of their life, but we are always talking about people in their 20s. 20 to 30 years ago, the average young family started when the parents were in their mid-20s. We're now seeing a shift. About 10 years maybe, now the people are in their early 30s, mid-30s. And that is one disruptive process in your life concerning your mobility demands and also the demand for your place to live in. And this is so far not a theme that has been tackled that much, because a lot of people then just move out of these smart cities into the commuter belt. And I would like to see your thoughts on that, please.
Thank you very much. I could bundle another question if we have one right now. Okay, not seeing over here. Thank you, Herman. I'm going to put that to you. Demographics, I'll say.
Good morning. David Heitch. I was surprised that nobody brought up the driver of environment and air quality as part of the mixture to, excuse the pun, to help people improve smart cities and mobility, because it seems to me that that's still a topic which is put on one side. Regulators have tried to impose targets. City authorities have, and national governments have studiously steered around them or ignored them. And we're still at a position where we have huge impacts on health and well-being because we're not actually getting to the core of the air quality and environmental issue.
And I'm sure you're referring here also to microparticles and NOx as well as, yeah. Okay, many thanks. Good. Then let us address both of those. I'm going to start with the demographics, and I'm going to even add something onto that. The questioner, and I'll ask you to comment perhaps on this, Katrin Trautmann. The questioner was talking about the fact that young families getting started later, but then many of them moving out of the urban region into surrounding countryside, so perhaps losing some of the density. Then on the other hand, we also have the graying of many cities. I mentioned it earlier, but I think you didn't address it directly. So how do you see demographics playing into your strategy for a smart city, for example, in Strasbourg?
I think that there are two reasons for families to go out of a dense city. The first is that they imagine that they will have better air and less pollution. The problem is for them transport and the cost of transport. And it's the case when the children are elder because, of course, there is sport activities, cultural activities, and they need to be present in the sport association and so on. So very often they go to the villages and then they come back in city because of these needs and the cost. So there is a double movement. If I see our experience, the problem is to obtain with the increasing part of demography in cities, dense cities, but viable and livable cities. So we work on new organization of quarters, what we call eco quarters, that are quarters in which you have green parts, gardens, capacities to organize a conciergerie for your car, for the urban services you need, for your shopping, etc. So there are new services linked to this organization of cities. When we succeed for that, young families still decide to live in cities. But I wanted to make a study on the evolution of the metropolitan, dynamism. In metropolization, you have densification and extension. So more and more, the limit of the metropolitan era is going further. And then when you are out of the urban era, you have a lack of proximity for services, so you have more distance to have services. But when you are in the urban era, you have new possibilities of services of proximity. This is very interesting. So we need to work on this evolution. That's why I think that today in Europe we have some advantages. And one of the advantages is to have dense cities, but not too much, but having also good connections with rural areas. And we have a reflection with the, the smart cities, urban nodes, to see how we link out the metropolitan area and the extra-metropolitan area. Everything is about the network. So this is new solutions also for smart city. What is the problem we meet? The problem is that we don't have a coherent view between the local level, the regional level, national level, and the European level. So this is a problem. So now we think that, like, the Russian dolls, we need to have combining, possibilities of this urban planning, because we need to tackle the increasing part of population, but the autonomous or common service. We need to do both. So this is very important. So we use also some tests with students, because we think that working with students about transport question, creating companies, having a formation for business through students is also a way to find new answers for these special needs. So this is very interesting. So I think there is a big stimulation. I agree with Wolfgang. The Commission did a tremendous job to give tools. We need just to use them and to work together to find new solutions. This is possible. And I think in Europe we have some, we are sure when we discuss together cities that we have some, some advantages in our hands. The problem is to be listened to by our governments. And we will do with my colleague Pat Cox, previous president of the European Parliament, we will sign a paper, an issue paper for the Commission, DG Move, and we will discuss it on ITS with the ministers of transport, because we think that they need the governments to be together to give the occasion to deploy ITS. Now we are just about this question, how we deploy in the same time, the same movement, the same dynamism, ITS solutions.
Thank you very much. So a smart city must be conceived of as part of a smart region. Very clear message there, also for demographic reasons. Also, smart city is a healthy city. The question posed by our last questioner there. Who would like to briefly address that? Martin Hall?
I think that's a perfectly good point, David, and it is something that should have been mentioned. The fact of the matter is, if you can gather as much information as possible about who's using what modes of transport in your city, you can start to make those who are polluting the city as unpopular as smokers used to be. And that's where we should get to. And you can manipulate the system in order to achieve that end. That's where we're going. And on the young people moving out, yes, they will move out, and they've got young children. They don't want to go on a bus. What we're talking about here are urban solutions. That's where the revolution will start, or the evolution, depending on which attitude you take. But people are still going to need cars for some time to come, because we don't have the services in the countryside.
Yeah.
And just on the point about people moving out, we've got to remember also that connecting autonomous vehicles, when they do come into full fruition, are not just urban solutions. They are about linking up the rural environments and providing, instead of the villages that have got a bus that does, one a day or one an hour or something like this, it's on demand. So you actually increase that. And for what Wolfgang said about his mother not using Twitter, we'll have to work out how they can call on demand these services to allow people to have that mobility as they demand it as well.
And that is very much something that would affect the older citizens that whom I mentioned earlier. The ability perhaps to get mini vehicles to them that can take them to the doctor, that can deliver their groceries, so full range of services for people.
And they're concerned in our travel needs survey as well. We didn't just sort of say that everyone's an urban metropolite or they're a sort of a user of suburbanites. because, you know, myself, I'm an urban metropolite in the day, and then I get home and I've got 2 young kids, so I become a suburban user. So there's that flex between the positions as well. So we sort of understand that. But again, you know, that we asked some people, and some of the older citizens were like, well, does it have a low door so I can get my shopping in? You know, it's like, okay, you know, maybe not thought of that. But it's those sorts of discussions with users and how you work the system, and being able for the system itself to be able to cope with the demands of all of those people. Will you put your kids in an autonomous vehicle to take them to school? Don't know. You know, it's a question of, again, of trust and also of delivery. So operating models, business models will need to change, will change, and it's a question of whether you can kind of change them and shuffle them yourself, or whether you go like down the Apple route when they, you know, buy Diddy and buy into a service like that. So,
which is why inclusion and access are such crucial attributes of smartness.
And electric vehicles are very much part of that solution, David. I know it's clean at the at the exhaust point there, and it obviously has to be generated somewhere else. But again, at least then it can be part of that sort of, you know, holistic solution that's taken on, as Catherine said, the sort of the local, the regional, the national, and the European, and even say global stage. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Well,
No, just to support what you said in your last sentence, as was Madame Trautmann said, about the cooperation between the different levels, the local level, the regional level, national, European, and you mentioned the global as well. I think what is important is that these different levels need to cooperate closely, understand each other. It's not an isolated solution which should be implemented in one place, one city. It has to be embedded into a region, into a national program. And, well, of course, from our interest, we have to keep in mind the European dimension. So that's our task.
Many, many thanks to all of you. Let's give them a very warm round of applause, please.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, thanks to you for your attention and your participation as well, both in our votes and with your questions. That brings our plenary to a close, but there's lots to look forward to throughout the day. If you check out our app, you will be able to find the conference program online. So do look at what's in store. I wish everybody a great day and a great Congress, and look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.